What's up, guys? Metal571 here, and today I'm going to be talking about the Meze Empyrean. It's a $3,000 32 ohm 100 decibel per milliwatt at 1 kilohertz isodynamic hybrid array planar magnetic open back headphone. Try saying that 6 times fast. This is an interesting headphone because it has not just a regular planar magnetic driver, but also a fairly, well, it's hard to get on camera, a fairly interestingly shaped one where I believe part of the voice coil goes back and forth, and then there's a ring voice coil at the bottom, and so one part of the driver is better at like the mids and highs, and one part of it is better at the bass, something along those lines. So it's somewhat unique, and I don't think anyone's done that particular kind of planar driver before. It's also very expensive and built and looks it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So to preface this review, Meze Audio has this loaner tour going around, so I'm a part of that, and that's why this review is happening. They haven't influenced me any other way to say anything else about this headphone in particular. They just wanted me to put the link in the description that's provided below to their site, and that's it. So let's talk about the sound of this thing. Bass, yes. Yes. The bass here extends as much as you'd hope for a planar. It sounds like a broken record, I know, but you know, with things like the HE4XX and the 400S around, there's some issues with potentially extending properly in the bass with some planars. So as a result of that, I have to let you know that this does not have any of those issues, thankfully, especially for this price. Now, a lot of this review, I want to talk about this headphone in comparison to the Audeze LCD4. Yes, it's back again. This time, this is Flux's pair. He's the same guy who sent it out to Joshua Valor and Z Reviews and all your other favorite YouTubers, probably. So that's his pair, same unit as those guys have had in before, and it's quite a good one. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the conclusion, just as kind of an aside, because we want to talk about the Empyrean mainly. But in comparison, my point with the bass here is that it just doesn't sound like there's quite as much dynamic slam here as the LCD4 has. So like when, you know, bass hits in EDM, or you know, the bass drum in rock and metal hits very strongly when it has a lot of dynamics in the recording, it's just not quite as impactful as on the LCD4. I didn't even know this could bend this way until now. There's so many hinges on this thing. So the bass is there, it extends really well, and it doesn't slam quite as hard as the really high-end headphones, 4,000 plus. I don't have the Utopia on hand, but I've heard it has incredible dynamics as well. And I know the Alex does, because I've reviewed that already. And I think this is just a little bit behind those, to be honest. Now the mids, here's where most of the problem is with this headphone, actually. But it's only because I have to nitpick. And like, actually, when I first got this headphone, I put it on and I didn't come off for like 2 or 3 hours because it just sounded awesome. And it's always that honeymoon period where you got to be careful about listening to anything I say, and that's why it takes me at least a week to do these, usually more. But so the mids here, they could have been better. Now, they are very decent in detail, but I still feel like there's like a haze going on across them, and it's something that you'll never notice unless you compare it to the other multi-kilobuck headphones. It's just slightly grainier, and it's just not quite as detailed as some of these other headphones are in this price range. And as far as the tone goes, they're slightly off timbre because these already have very relaxed upper mids, like, I don't know, probably at least 3 or 4 dB minimum, less than the Sennheiser 6X0 series that I use as my reference. However, I did find those a little shouty, so I don't mind that there's less upper mids here. Some people find this downright dark. I don't. But the bigger problem is that the rise in the mids going up to that 3K, 3.5K peak is not fast enough. And so they're lacking this region around 1 to 1.5K, so I had to bump that up by 3 decibels. And in fact, that's the only EQ I applied to this headphone at all. I'm not even going to leave an EQ in the description, because all you have to do is take a Q 1.41 3 decibel boost at 1.5K, and that's your EQ for this thing if you want to try a little bit of mid-range fixing. Unfortunately, though, below that, it sounds like this is just a thick sounding headphone. And so everything below, I'd say, I don't know, I'm trying to think about it in my head, not looking at a graph. Maybe everything under like 500 hertz is just slightly boosted, and then it's just a straight line out to 10 hertz from there. And that's kind of the way it sounds. It's funny, I don't want, this is going to sound really bad, but it has a little bit of that Nighthawkishness to it, in that it's got a bass hump that you could think of it as a bass hump that extends all the way out to like almost the low mids, or a little bit higher than that, but it's very slight, so it sounds slightly congested because of that. It's not as just like lean and clean and just goes straight out to the bass. So it may or may not bother you, but that's something to keep in mind about the way the mids sound here, plus the 1.5K. And I just don't think it's quite on the heels of, you know, the masters like the LCD4. And this is not even the most detailed headphone there is, as far as I'm concerned. I really like it, and it is incredibly high resolution, but it's supposedly there's still better out there. I mean, Stax's L700 was incredible in detail. I don't even think this is quite there in terms of that. But other than that, it's a very inoffensive sound, and like I said when I first put it on, I mean, if you're not nitpicking on this thing, you're still going to really enjoy music on this thing. So that's the mids. And the treble, so the treble here is exactly at the level I'm looking for, I think, in a headphone. There's absolutely nothing I did to change the treble of this, and that's going to trigger a lot of people who like diffuse field tuning, because if you've ever seen this thing measured on HeadFi or the numerous other places people have put this on a measurement head, the treble's really dark, but that's only by diffuse field standards. By Harman standards, it's almost on target from everything I've seen, and I tend to agree with that. Now, again, it just is missing that last level of detail in the treble here compared to the LCD4 in my demoing of these two back and forth to make sure I am right about that. Because I really do put time into this stuff, guys. And the tuning of it is just, I wouldn't change anything. It's basically perfect. It sounds clean, maybe slightly sparkly above 10K, so a little bit elevation in the air region, just a little. But like, I'm really nitpicking now on the FR because of the price mainly. But it's not quite as detailed as the LCD4, and that's kind of the theme going on here throughout. Now, one advantage, however, is that it's easy to drive, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about that in the other section that I've devoted later on. But moving on to the soundstage, yeah, wow, the soundstage is awesome. I mean, there's a certain level of how good a soundstage is in terms of how wide the image is and how pinpoint the instruments are, and this just blows way past that, and it's totally awesome for this price range. I don't have any complaints about the soundstage here. That is definitely one of the highlights, sorry about that, of this headphone. So, other stuff I want to talk about that's not the sound as much. I would say that the build quality of this headphone and the comfort are perfect. I have never, ever had a headphone that weighed just the right amount without getting too heavy. This shape is actually on purpose, from according to their website, to fit your head correctly, just right. And these pads they're just infinitely deep. And the clamp is still fairly light, and it's perfect. Like, there's nothing I would change about the comfort of this thing. It's so good. And I'd hope so for, $3,000, right? So, something I wanted to say later, but I'll say now because it makes more sense, is that this is kind of like a $1,500 to $2,000 headphone in terms of sound quality with a $6,000+ build. It's really what it reminds me of. I mean, it's just incredible. I think this is machined out of aluminum, actually. This crazy design. I don't actually know if you guys can see. Yeah, there you go. Now you can see it. Just unbelievable build quality and materials, and yet it's still not so heavy. And that's one of the big advantages of it over the LC4, which is just a tank. It's a monster of a headphone. It's not something everyone's going to find comfortable just from weight alone, even though the design of the ergonomics on it is good. It's just a certain level of weight that some people will not be able to tolerate, and I don't think this is ever going to be too heavy for anybody. So that's a big highlight here. Now, unfortunately, the cables it comes with, like, I actually have the balanced and the unbalanced, single-ended here, but this is the single-ended. And at first glance, I was like, what is Z talking about? These cables are actually pretty good. And yeah, they're built fine. But the problem is that, I don't know if he showed it because I don't even think I watched his full review, but they tend to want to go one direction. Like they either flop this way or this way. And like if you try to, they really have a memory to them that is just annoying. And I wish that was better for the price, that's for sure. It's kind of like a flat cable going this way, and then these sides are rigid, and so that's why it resists motion in certain ways. It's hard to describe, but could have been better. I mean, the build quality of the cable itself is great, but I wish it had less memory, a lot less memory than it does. I have to nitpick on that stuff because of the price of this thing. The other thing is it does come with another set of pads. I believe these are Alcantara pads, I believe. And when you put these on, the first thing I noticed was where did the detail go that this thing had. It gets even grainier. If you want to hear what a grainier sound sounds like, try these pads on the Empyrean. I'm sure there's millions of you who own one. But yeah, and this is something I noticed at Can Jam when I first heard this thing too. When I went around to the booths, I went to the ones that had the suede pads, and I'm like, this doesn't even sound like the Empyrean anymore. And then I go to the ones with the leather, and I'm like, whoa. So yeah, the suede pads are almost pointless. They also cause an even larger scoop at around 1.5K than they already have with the leather pads. So yeah, the suede pads don't really work. Wouldn't recommend using them at all if you have this thing. So, in conclusion, what do we have here? We have a headphone that has, like I said earlier, like $1,000 to $1,500 sound quality maybe, but the build is like impossible to beat. And so, if you combine those two things, I guess that's how you come up with $3,000. But you know, personally, if sound quality is your number one priority, and if you're watching this channel, it probably is, you can still get better. I feel like I'd rather listen to an LCD3 than this thing, and maybe that's really mean to say to it, but I think it's on the level of detail or somewhere around there. A good modern LCD3, that is, not the first one I reviewed. If you guys have been following me for a while, you know about that one. And that's only $2,000. Only $2,000. Man, it's a crazy world we live in with the pricing of headphones now. But I have to say, the guy who designs this stuff at the company, I believe, was a former industrial designer. So he really knows what he's doing. And it's just a beautiful headphone. It's built so well with perfect comfort. I just want there to be another level of detail. And I think what happened was that these are 32 ohm, and they kind of sound like what Odyssey tried to do with the LCD4Z, which is make a really easy to drive headphone. These work off everything, which is crazy. Even though I demoed them on a THX 789 fed by a topping D50, for full disclosure here, they'll run on a phone, and it's crazy that they do. But there's clearly some kind of sacrifice going on there, and the LCD4 has got the biggest magnets and the lightest possible diaphragm, the thinnest possible, and the lightest voice. Everything is just like optimized to be like, yeah, your phone can't do this, and nothing can. And in fact, even with the 789, I have to run the LCD4 with a balance cable constantly, or it's just not enough juice for the thing. It's so hungry. And it would, what would be interesting is if Empyrean was released in like an Empyrean 2 or an Empyrean Plus, where they focused on maximum possible detail by seemingly, and this is only an empirical kind of like a subjective thing that I've discovered, is the thinner the diaphragm seem to get in these things, and the harder they are to drive, it kind of enables another level of sound quality almost. And that seems to be what I've encountered over the years of reviewing. And so if they made an interesting version of this where you can't drive it except for on a headphone amp, then maybe it'll sound even better. And I'd be more forgiving of the $3,000 price. So that's the Meze Empyrean. Hope that helps you make a decision. It's a bit of a thick sounding planer with infinite bass and very warm mids and relaxing highs. It's definitely right down my alley in terms of sound, but I wish the technicalities were just a little better, because if they were, this would be the most glowing review ever. hey, LCD4, well, you don't have to pay $4,000. You can only pay $3,000 for it. Something like that. But it's just not quite there. All right. Thanks, guys. And for those who care about the differences for LCD4s, which I said I would talk about at the end as an aside, Flux's is really, really good. It actually has, I remember I talked about the air being too bright, and I didn't remember other LCD4s sounding like that. So strangely, Odyssey of all people sends me their LCD4 that they had, and it ends up being the worst sounding one that I've heard. And Flux's and another LCD4 I had from a very generous guy at CanJam last year, that I borrowed for a while while I was on like a hiatus. Both of these, this and that one, sound incredible, just like perfect. Like I wouldn't change the treble at all. Of course, there's still that little recession at 4 to 5K, you know, and then the mids are a little bit quiet. But like the detail this thing puts out, the difference that I want to, and difference I really want you guys to know is that the Empyrean, I put it on and it sounds awesome. I really like it. But the LCD4 makes Metal 571 cry. That's what it does. And that's the difference between a really good headphone and one of the world-class headphones. Thanks, guys. See you guys in the next review.